Hello, my name is Paul, and I'm a librarian at Avalon Library, part of LA County Library. And welcome to Storytime for Grown-ups, our new series of story times for not necessarily children. Everybody loves a story time. I'm very excited to bring you some classic material, much of it taken from Project Gutenberg, which is open source public domain works that anybody can read and perform anytime, anywhere. We start today with some limericks from the delightful nonsense writer Edward Lear. Edward Lear, of course, wrote The Owl and the Pussycat, but his book, A Book of Nonsense, published in 1846, contains limericks, which are perhaps what he's best known for. So let's start with a few limericks. There was an old man with a nose who said, "If you choose to suppose that my nose is too long, you are certainly wrong." That remarkable man with a nose. And here is a picture clipped from his text, and you can see the man's nose is quite astonishing, and people are quite surprised by it. Edward Lear did his own illustrations, and they're actually as much of a delight as the limericks themselves, I think. There was an old man who said, "How shall I flee from this horrible cow? I will sit on this stile and continue to smile, which may soften the heart of that cow." And yeah, I don't know. The smile is a bit wacky, and I'm not at all sure the cow is remotely mollified, but there you are. A wonderful picture by Mr. Edward Lear. There was a young lady of Butte who played on a silver gilt flute. She played several jigs to her uncle's white pigs. That amusing young lady of Butte. And there are the pigs, aren't they sleek? And oh my, she looks like she's got fine classical form as she plays that flute. Very nice. Thank you. Thank you very much for indulging me on my nonsense Edward Lear limericks. Now we're going to return to a passage from Mark Twain's famous travel writing. The book is called Roughing It, and it describes Twain's journey throughout the U.S., particularly the West. He stayed for a time in the Sierras, and the passage I'm going to read describes a place called Mono Lake, which is just outside of Yosemite. If you've ever been up to Yosemite or Mammoth, you'll have seen it. It's kind of unique. And I'm not exactly sure how much of this is a believable story, but here we are. Mono Lake lies in a lifeless, treeless, hideous desert, 8,000 feet above the level of the sea, and is guarded by mountains 2,000 feet high, whose summits are always clothed in clouds. This solemn, silent, sailless sea, the lonely tenant of the loneliest spot on earth, is little graced with the picturesque. It is an unpretending expanse of grayish water, about 100 miles in circumference, with two islands in the center, mere upheavals of rent and scorched and blistered lava, snowed over with gray banks and drifts of pumice stone and ashes, the winding sheet of the dead volcano, whose vast crater the lake has seized upon and occupied. The lake is 200 feet deep, and its sluggish waters are so strong with alkali that if you only dip the most hopelessly soiled garment into them once or twice and wring it out, it will be found as clean as if it had been through the ablest of the washerwoman's hands. While we camped there, our laundry work was easy. We tied the weeks washing astern of our boat, and sailed a quarter of a mile, and then the job was complete, all to the wringing out. If we threw the water on our heads and gave them a rub or two, the white lather would pile up 3 inches high. This water is not good for bruised places and the abrasions of the skin. We had a valuable dog. He had raw places on him. He had more raw places on him than sound ones. He was the rawest dog I almost ever saw. He jumped overboard one day to get away from the flies, but it was bad judgment. In his condition, it would have been just as comfortable to jump into the fire. The alkali water nipped him in all the raw places simultaneously, and he struck out for the shore with considerable interest. He yelped and barked and howled as he went, and by the time he got to the shore, there was no bark to him, for he had barked the bark all out of his inside, and the alkali water had cleaned the bark all off his outside, and he probably wished he had never embarked on any such exercise. He ran around and around in a circle and pawed the earth and clawed the air and threw double somersets, sometimes backwards, sometimes forward, and in the most extraordinary manner. He was not the most demonstrative dog, as a general thing, but rather of a grave and serious turn of mind, and I never saw him take much of an interest in anything before. He finally struck out over the mountains at a gait which we estimated at about 250 miles an hour, and he is going yet. This was about 9 years ago. We look for what is left of him along here every day. I'm not sure how much of that can be trusted. Mr. Twain was fond of his tall tales, so yes, I don't know what to tell you about that one, but it makes for good reading. A lot of his travel writing is excellent. So thank you. Finally, we now turn to a scene from Jane Austen's novel, Pride and Prejudice. I am going to do the scene in which the utterly unsuitable Mr. Collins tries to propose to Elizabeth Bennet. Now, I'm kind of alone in this library today, so I don't have anybody to play Miss Elizabeth Bennet, so I brought my friend a puppet. Mr. Collins? Miss Bennet, how do you do? Okay, you can turn away anytime you like, but okay. So let's start. Elizabeth sat down and tried to conceal by incessant employment the feelings which were divided between distress and aversion. Mrs. Bennet and Kitty walked off, and as soon as they were gone, Mr. Collins, that's me, began. Believe me, my dear Elizabeth, that your modesty, so far from doing you any disservice, rather adds to your other perfection. You would have been a little less amiable in my eyes had there not been this little unwillingness. You can hardly doubt the purport of my discourse. Almost as soon as I entered this house, I singled you out as the companion for my future life. But before I am run away with the feelings on this subject, perhaps it would be advisable for me to state my reasons for marrying, and moreover for coming into Herefordshire with the desire of selecting a wife, which I certainly did. The idea of Mr. Collins, with all his solemn composure, being run away with by his feelings, made Elizabeth so near laughing that she could not use the short pause he allowed in any attempt to stop him further, and he continued, My reasons for marrying are, first, that I think it is a right thing for every clergyman in easy circumstances, like myself, to set the example of matrimony in the parish. Secondly, that I am convinced that it will add very greatly to my happiness. And thirdly, which perhaps I ought to have mentioned earlier, that it is the particular advice and recommendation of the very noble lady whom I have the honor of calling patroness. Twice has she condescended to give me her opinion, unasked too, on this subject, and it was but this very Saturday night before I left Hunsford, between our pools at quadrille, while Miss Jenkinson was arranging Miss de Bourgh's footstool, that she said, Mr. Collins, you must marry. A clergyman like you must marry. It was absolutely necessary to interrupt him now. You are too hasty, sir, she cried. You forget I have made no answer. Let me do so without further loss of time. Accept my thanks for the compliment you are paying me. I am very sensible of the honor of your proposals, but it is impossible for me to do otherwise than to decline them. I am not now to learn, replied Mr. Collins, with a formal wave of his hand, that it is usual with young ladies to reject the addresses of the man whom they secretly mean to accept when he first applies for their favor, and that sometimes the refusal is repeated a second time, or even a third time. I am therefore by no means discouraged by what you have just said, and I shall hope to lead you to the altar afore long. Upon my word, sir, cried Elizabeth, your hope is rather extraordinary. I do assure you that I am not one of those young ladies. I am perfectly serious in my refusal. You could not make me happy, and I am convinced I am the last woman in the world who could make you happy. When I do you the honor of speaking to you next on the subject, I shall hope to receive a more favorable answer than you have now given me. Perhaps you have even now said as much to encourage my suit as would be consistent with the true delicacy of female character. Really, Mr. Collins, cried Elizabeth, with some warmth, you puzzle me exceedingly. If what I have hitherto said can appear to you in some form of encouragement, I know not how to express my refusal in such a way as to convince you of being one. You must give me leave to flatter myself, my dear cousin, that your refusal of my address is merely words, of course. Your portion is unhappily so small that it will in all likelihood undo the effects of your loveliness and your amiable qualifications. She's poor. As I must therefore conclude that you are not serious in your rejection of me, I shall choose to attribute it to your wish of increasing my love by suspense, according to the usual practice of elegant females. I do assure you that I have no pretensions whatever to that kind of elegance which consists in tormenting a respectable man. Can I speak plainer? Do you not consider me now as an elegant female intending to plague you, but as a rational creature speaking the truth from her heart? Oh, you are uniformly charming, cried he, with an air of awkward gallantry, and I am persuaded that when sanctioned by the express authority of both your excellent parents, my proposals will not fail of being acceptable. To such perseverance, in willful self-deception, Elizabeth would make no reply, and immediately in silence withdrew. All right. Thank you for sitting through all that. I'm not exactly sure how that worked. I'm going to need to watch it on the replay and see if it's not completely wacky. But anyway, thank you very much for attending Storytime for Grown-Ups. I look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you. Have a great day.